Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Today we've got 2 Dogman stories because it's 2 for Tuesday here on the Scary Stories channel. We have a really scary one coming up called Lost in the Forest with Dogman. But first we'd like to tell you this utterly freaky story we like to call My Wife Keeps Seeing Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my finances and my personal life are in an uproar because my wife keeps seeing Dogman. Let me go back to the beginning so that the story makes sense. I grew up in Michigan. My family had owned a house and the land there for generations. I was the only child my parents had, so I inherited all of it. I looked forward since I was a child in marrying and raising kids there, on my family's land. Well, I married all right, and my wife moved in. Then she began insisting that my house was haunted. I told her if it was, they were all her in-laws, so she should get used to them. She wouldn't. She called in all sorts of spiritual cleansers and ghost hunters and a priest and a shaman and some other people I'm forgetting, costing me a ton of money in donations in the process. And she still felt the house was haunted by ghosts who didn't like her. She pushed and pushed on this until I finally agreed to sell my family's ancestral home that I had never wanted to leave and let her pick out where we would move next. I wanted her to choose the place so that I wouldn't get blamed if there were ghosts there too. Well, I needn't have worried about spirit infestation on this new land. No, on this property, my wife became convinced that the place was infested with Dogman. What is Dogman? I asked her incredulously, and I watched as she rolled her eyes. Everyone knows what Dogman is, she huffed. I got out my phone and Googled it. Turns out Dogman is a series of children's books by Dav Pilkey. I wondered seriously if my wife might need some sort of therapy. The resentments between us only grew. She had caused me to leave my home and sell it, along with all my childhood memories, to live in this other place that she now also wanted me to sell and move from. Whereas at first I had promised to always provide for her, now I had switched to urging her to get a day job. We didn't really need the money, but I wanted her to have something to do every day that was grounded in the real world, not her fantasy romances and TV shows. I felt like even if it was busy work, it would be good for her to talk to other people every day and develop a better internal gauge for determining if she was talking crazy or not. Every day, I was coming home to her acting all small and frightened, telling me how terrified she was of the Dogman walking around the property all day. My response increasingly was to tell her to get a job in the city during the day like the one I had. Then she would be too busy to worry about mythical beasts roaming through the forests of her imagination. I began to believe her less and less. Whatever she said was treated with great skepticism by me. Even when she told me the weather was nice out, I checked a second source before accepting it as the truth. She never seemed to notice how much credibility she was losing, and it was getting worse every day. I wanted to somehow get through to her, but wasn't sure how to without getting her even more upset. One day when I came home to a messy house and no dinner, I firmly asked her to stop blaming her failures on imaginary monsters and to take stock of her life end our marriage. She acted shocked and offended, crying about what a victim she was and how she was helpless in the face of this horrible dogman oppressor or whatever. I told her that real things can be photographed. If Dogman is real, then it was her responsibility to get photos of it. Not only would that bring me over to her side, but it would be warning the world of this terrible threat of dog-headed men wandering through the forests of North America, terrifying stay-at-home wives. To her credit, she took me at my word and began attempting to photograph her delusions from that point forward. At least it gave her a renewed purpose. Instead of me coming home to a trembling, whimpering victim stammering about the monsters after her, I came home to a nutty lady showing me pictures of trees and leaves, then telling me elaborate 5 or 10 minute long narratives about what happened that led up to this photo and how that shadow and tree bark in the corner was really the horrible and vicious, abominable Dogman monster. It was during this period that I finally came to understand that Dogman is a kind of a werewolf, or an animal or something that looks a lot like a werewolf from the movies. I learned that from her descriptions, though, because there was nothing resembling a werewolf in any of my wife's photos, no matter how much she might have insisted there were. A few weeks of taking photos of trees had brought a lot of my wife's confidence back, which I was glad about. Unfortunately, it hadn't done anything to dampen her delusions, and so she was becoming ruder and ruder about her claims that I was ignoring the evidence she had been producing. I asked her if she was so confident about her so-called evidence, why didn't she invite a group of our friends over and see how many of them were able to see werewolves in the shadows of her photos? She instantly accepted the challenge and began calling people, arranging a get-together at our house on a day when the most people could make it. Of course, everyone laughed and assumed this was some kind of parlor game. Nobody saw werewolves, and they made jokes about it much meaner than I ever would have. I felt bad that I had suggested this event in the first place and actually started defending the photos midway through, just to get people to lighten up on the mockery. The evening threw my wife back into a deep emotional hole, and since I was the one who had caused it, I was going to have to be the one to pull her out. I enrolled us in marriage therapy and dragged her to it, but she was increasingly unresponsive. She acted defeated, not cured. To deny her Dogman delusions was taking away her reason to get up in the morning. I can't understand why I never saw these aspects of her personality before we got married. I was beginning to talk to my lawyer about the possibility of taking more drastic action to get her help, trying to understand my legal and moral options at the time. One day, I was gardening out back. My wife used to do it, but she had given it up over fear of being in the backyard with Dogman around. I had taken it up at first to keep up appearances for the neighbors, but it had soon become a meditational practice and brought me much inner peace. I found that working in the garden was something that could entirely fill up my attention, while at the same time requiring no conscious thought at all. It helped me get a deeper unconscious understanding of what life is and how we can nurture it, or we can pull it up by its roots with our actions. So that one day in the garden, I saw something out of the corner of my eye that attracted my attention. I thought I saw a horse about to come around the corner of the house into the backyard. Alarmed, I turned to stare in that direction and saw that it was not, in fact, a horse's head at all. It was a dog's head. Only it was at the elevation of a horse's head, a tall horse, maybe, 6 or 7 feet off the ground. The face had poked out past the house and was surveying the backyard, as if to see if the coast was clear. Its eyes shifted all the way to one side, and apparently it saw me. Once it had, the head immediately pulled back to hide itself behind the house. I stood and ran, not toward the vision, but parallel to it across to the other side of the yard. I wasn't trying to get closer. I just wanted to get to an angle where I could see that side of the house better. I couldn't imagine what I had just witnessed. Either it was a horse with a dog's head, or it was a dog flying 6 or 7 feet off the ground, or was there something on that side a dog could stand on? When I got to a good angle, though, all I could see was what you would expect to be there. The grass-covered pathway from the yard to the front of the house, with a patch of trees defining the edge of our property. There was no animal there. Not a dog, not a dog man, not a horse, not a flying dog horse, and not a person in a costume. I want to say that if you're thinking my wife put on a dog head mask and peeked around the corner to freak me out, that would be impossible. She is not much of an athlete and could never have disappeared from my view in time. And I think we can rule out the idea of a dog mask in general, since it was a genuine animal head with eyes moving in its skull, not a mask. It was the middle of the day. I would have been able to see if it was a mask at that distance. If it was a real animal, it would have needed to be lightning fast to get away before I could maneuver to the side to get a better view. I should have at least been able to catch a view of it running away. It had to have run back into the trees, which is what my wife said the dogmen do. I ran over to the spot where it would have been standing, assuming I hadn't imagined the entire episode. I saw no paw prints on the ground anywhere, leading to or from that spot either. The ground over there was pretty hard and dry, though. I tried stomping hard to see how deep a mark I could make with my boot, but I barely disturbed the dirt at all. Even if that animal weighed 500 pounds, I doubt if it would have made any impressions. About 2 hours later, I was finishing digging up and watering the dirt on the side of the house when my wife came out asking me what I was doing. I actually was trying to create mud so that the animal would leave footprints next time, but I didn't want to say that to her. I felt like a kid caught out, and I made up a story about how I was trying to stir up the dirt so I could plant new grass there. She asked me if I wanted her to go get the grass seed, but thinking fast, I said I wanted to wait a couple of weeks before planting and I just wanted to get the ground soft first. She looked at me like I was crazy, and I began to feel some empathy for how it must have felt to be her all those months. So, anyway, no dog footprints ever turned up in my muddy dirt on the side of the house, and I eventually tossed some grass seed in there, as I had promised my wife I would. Next month, if all goes as planned, we will finally be in a financial position to be able to sell this home and attempt a third time to find a peaceful place in which to try to raise a family. I no longer think my wife is crazy, but I do think she's incredibly sensitive. I hope she isn't attracting these kinds of things to us, in which case we might just be cursed. But I hope that with kindness, patience, and understanding, we can find a physical and emotional place where we can put down roots and grow in a healthy way. Until then, though, my wife keeps seeing Dogman. Don't go anywhere. We've got a story of a guy who got lost in the forest with Dogman right after this.
I'm PQ Ribber. Join me and Dr. Death for a new cryptid each week on Monday Night Monsters. It all begins August 26th right here on Scary Stories NYC.
I'm Madeline Starr, and you can join me here each week. Come back every Saturday night as I host another episode of Saturday Night Scary Serials right here on the Scary Stories NYC channel. It all begins August 31st.
Lost in the forest with Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I grew up in Wisconsin, and I've always loved camping. It seemed like a vacation from all the bad stuff in my life, an escape into a world of relaxation, nature, and sanity. That is, until the night when I found myself lost in the forest with Dogman. This was back about 6 or 7 years ago, and I've never gone camping again since. I even freak out driving through the country now. I find the sight of a lot of trees terrifying. I like the city. I like streets with lights on them. I prefer the company of humans to that of nature or wild animals. I used to run through nature in the mornings, but now I use a treadmill at the gym. Why? Because Dogman doesn't go to the gym. That's why. Before this all happened, I had 4 different friends I used to go camping with. 3 of them I had gone with more than once. This guy Marcus was one I'd camped with 4 or 5 times before this occurrence. We weren't really great friends, but we liked to go camping and to spend time in silence. It was safer and easier having a partner when out there, and that was the service we provided to each other. We would each bring our own tent and set them up next to each other, and we would eat together, but other than that, we talked very little and mostly spent the weekends in solitude. So, one night camping with Marcus, I awoke in my tent in the middle of the night realizing I had to relieve myself. I wandered away from camp toward the trees and picked a nice large one a ways into the forest to do my business by. The moon was either full or close to it because the forest seemed fairly well lit and easy to navigate that night. Anyway, while I was doing what I was doing, I could hear or sense a presence coming up behind me. I felt its footsteps. I could hear it breathing. And I either felt its body heat or I imagined that I did because I was very aware there was something large coming up behind me. My first thought was not actually a predator like a bear. I was thinking it was a moose. Don't laugh. Moose are at least as dangerous as bear in the woods because they're very easily spooked. They're incredibly large, like prehistorically large. And they have not got any brains in their heads at all. Without even looking behind me, I slid around to the opposite side of the tree in front of me, and I skedaddled away as quietly as I could manage, hoping that whatever was behind me had not noticed me yet. I figured that either my pursuer was coming straight for me on purpose, or it just happened to be coming this way by chance, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was hoping the latter was the case, but if it was, the coincidence dragged out even longer. The thing behind me crossed around that big tree just as I had, and I could hear it continue to walk in the path directly behind me. Now, I am not a nature expert. Some people say they can tell the difference between the sound of a 4-footed animal walking and a 2-legged animal walking. I can't lay claim to that ability, but I knew there were strange and out-of-the-ordinary sounds coming from behind me. I continued walking forward, knowing that I was heading further and further away from camp. I didn't know what else to do. When the animal turned left or right, I would turn the opposite way and rush back to camp. While it walked behind me, I had to try to maintain the same distance between us, not let it get closer, but not appear to panic and run in case it actually was a predator and not a moose. At some point, I heard a growling coming from behind me, and my knees buckled. I went straight down onto them before staggering back up and looking behind me. What I saw was no moose. What I saw was this kind of taller, thinner bear, but it had a tail, and it had a dog's head, like a bear with pointed ears and a long snout. It didn't have that big round head like a bear. It looked more like a wolf or a fox, that kind of a face, but giant. It was dark, like a black bear, but it was bipedal. It had a tongue hanging out of its long snout and had glowing eyes. People asked me what color those eyes were, and it was that color that cat's eyes look if you take their picture with the flash on. Almost white, but not quite. I don't know if that was the moonlight in its eye shine, or if it really generated the light from within, but it added an eerie effect to a terrifying sight. I ran to my right, then turned left and just flew, racing back to the tents. When I got to the clearing, I couldn't see the dogman anywhere, so I ran to Marcus's tent. I woke him up, shaking the tent and insisting he let me in. When he refused, I hissed there was a predator following me and shook the tent some more. He unzipped, and I forced my way in before he could protest any more than zipped up behind myself. The dogman exited the forest. I could hear it come over to sniff our tent. It growled. It huffed. It puffed. It strode back and forth till a little before dawn. I sat with my knees pressed against my chest in utter horror. But Marcus went right back to sleep. In the morning, we argued over the events of the previous night. He refused to believe there was a dogman outside. I looked around and found large dog prints, and he laughed at me that I was afraid of puppy dogs. As I stated earlier, that was the end of camping for me. And not just in Wisconsin either, but any place. I'm a city boy now, and I'm not afraid to admit it. I won't say I'm proud of it, but at least I'm smart enough to give up when I realize I'm overmatched. I'd far rather get lost in a city than ever be back in a situation where I would be lost in the forest with Dogman. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.